Your mind is slow, your soul already knows. And ignoring that truth is costing you more than you think. You've been taught to trust logic above everything else, to think harder, analyze deeper, wait longer. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The most important decisions in your life were never meant to be made by logic alone. Before you can explain, justify, or defend a choice, something inside you has already decided. That quiet knowing you keep dismissing? That's not imagination. That's intelligence operating beneath thought. Most people don't get stuck because they're incapable. They get stuck because they don't trust what they feel before they can explain it. They silence intuition, override inner signals, and call it being rational. But as Carl G. Jung revealed, the hands often solve what the intellect struggles with in vain, because wisdom doesn't always speak in sentences. In this video, you're going to understand why your soul moves first, why your mind resists later, and how aligning the two unlocks clarity, confidence, and direction without forcing certainty or waiting for permission. If you've ever felt lost, conflicted, or tired of overthinking your life, this isn't theory. This is the missing link you've been sensing all along. You've felt it before, even if you didn't have words for it. That quiet nudge inside you that shows up before logic clocks in. It's subtle, almost inconvenient, because it doesn't explain itself. Your soul doesn't send memos, it sends signals. And here's the twist. It's usually right before your mind even wakes up. That first pull, that gut sense, that inner something's off feeling. Most people ignore it because it doesn't come with proof, but wisdom rarely arrives dressed as certainty. It shows up more like a whisper than a warning siren. And if you learn to listen, everything starts to shift. Think of your soul like an internal GPS with a weak signal but perfect direction. Your mind, on the other hand, wants maps, reviews, and guarantees. The problem is, life doesn't move in straight lines. By the time logic finishes its calculations, the moment has passed. That's why intuition feels faster. It doesn't debate. It recognizes patterns your conscious mind hasn't named yet. You've seen this with people you just didn't trust at first, or opportunities that felt right before they made sense on paper. That wasn't luck, it was awareness working beneath language. And ignoring it comes at a cost most people don't track. Here's a practical way to notice this wisdom in real life. Pay attention to what your body reacts to before your thoughts do. Tight chest, relaxed shoulders, sudden calm, unexplained resistance. These aren't random sensations, they're feedback. When making decisions, pause and ask, what feels aligned here? Not what looks impressive, not what sounds safe. Alignment feels quiet, not flashy. Try this with small choices first: what to read, who to call, where to go. Books like Man's Search for Meaning or The Alchemist sharpen this sensitivity. They train you to hear meaning beneath noise. The mind loves control, but control isn't the same as clarity. Sometimes overthinking is just fear wearing a lab coat. You replay scenarios, list pros and cons, seek one more opinion. Meanwhile, your soul already chose. That's why hesitation feels heavy. It's internal friction, like driving with the brakes on while pressing the gas. Wisdom flows, resistance drains. When something is right, there's energy even in uncertainty. When it's wrong, everything feels forced, even if it's logical. Learning this saves years of quiet regret. Most people don't fail because they lack intelligence. They fail because they don't trust themselves. They override inner knowing with borrowed opinions and social noise. But the soul isn't dramatic. It's consistent. It repeats messages until you listen. Ignore it long enough, and life gets louder. Missed chances, wrong turns, emotional exhaustion. Yet the invitation is always open. Start trusting the first signal, not blindly but respectfully. Because once you do, you'll notice something else stepping in. There comes a moment when thinking harder stops helping. You've been there, staring at the same problem, looping the same thoughts. Your mind wants resolution, but it's stuck spinning its wheels. And then, strangely, your body steps in. You move, act, touch, build, write, walk. Something physical happens. Suddenly, clarity appears without explanation. Not because you figured it out, but because you did something. The body doesn't argue, it responds. That's why breakthroughs often come while showering or walking. The answer arrives sideways, not head-on. Carl G. Jung once said that the hands often solve what the intellect cannot. That's not poetry, it's observation. When you engage your body, you bypass mental gridlock. Action shifts energy, and energy reveals insight. That's why pacing a room can calm anxiety faster than analyzing it. Or journaling clears confusion better than silent rumination. The body speaks a language older than logic. It knows when something is off before you can name it. Ignoring that wisdom keeps you trapped in your head. Listening to it pulls you back into flow. Here's something practical you can try immediately. When you feel mentally stuck, change your physical state. Go for a slow walk without headphones, just you and your thoughts. Write by hand instead of typing. Let your hands lead. Do something tactile, cooking, drawing, fixing something small. You're not escaping the problem, you're approaching it differently. Ideas surface when pressure drops. The mind loosens when the body feels safe. That's why movement is medicine for overthinking. Stillness of thought often follows motion of the body. Modern life traps you above the neck. Screens, schedules, endless decisions. Your nervous system never rests. So when intuition tries to speak, it gets drowned out. The body becomes tense, tired, reactive. But tension isn't weakness, it's information. It tells you where you're misaligned. A tight jaw may signal swallowed truth. Heavy shoulders may point to responsibility that isn't yours. Instead of numbing these signals, listen to them. They're messages, not malfunctions. When you reconnect with your body, trust begins to rebuild. You stop demanding certainty before moving forward. You act, observe, adjust, like learning to ride a bike. Balance isn't explained, it's felt. And once you feel it, you don't forget it. This is how wisdom becomes embodied, not theoretical. You don't just know, you sense. And sensing changes how you choose, who you trust, where you go. From here, something even quieter starts to matter. Because beneath movement there's a silence waiting. You've been taught to fear silence. Empty space feels awkward, unproductive, almost dangerous. So you fill it. Noise, scrolling, talking, thinking, planning. But silence isn't a void. It's a doorway. It's where the background noise finally steps aside. Most people never stay long enough to hear what's there. They confuse silence with nothingness. In reality, it's saturated with information. The soul speaks softly, and silence is its native language. If you rush past it, you miss everything. Think of silence like the space between musical notes. Without it, music becomes noise, meaning lives in the pauses, not the volume. Your inner wisdom works the same way. When the mind stops narrating, something deeper takes over. That's why clarity often arrives late at night or early morning. Moments when the world isn't demanding your attention. Silence lowers the guard of constant performance. And in that lowered state, truth slips through, not as words, but as knowing. Here's a simple practice that changes everything. Give yourself 10 minutes a day with no input. No phone, no music, no podcast, no agenda. Just sit or walk and let thoughts rise and fall. At first, it'll feel uncomfortable, like withdrawal. That discomfort is your mind detoxing from noise. Don't fight the thoughts. Let them pass like clouds. Eventually, gaps appear. Those gaps are gold. That's where insight breathes. Silence also reveals what you've been avoiding. Distractions work because they numb awareness. In quiet moments, unresolved emotions surface. That's not failure, that's honesty. Growth doesn't come from constant positivity. It comes from meeting what you've postponed. Silence holds a mirror, not a judgment. What you see there is what needs attention, and attention, when given fully, heals. That's why silence can feel intense before it feels peaceful. Once you befriend silence, your perception sharpens. You start noticing subtle patterns in your life, repeating situations, familiar frustrations, recurring desires. These aren't coincidences, they're signals. Silence connects the dots the mind overlooks. It slows time just enough for meaning to surface. And as you learn to stay with it, your choices change. You act less from impulse, more from alignment. From here, another truth becomes impossible to ignore, because understanding doesn't arrive all at once. There's a gap most people don't know how to tolerate. It's the space between knowing and understanding. Your soul moves first, quietly choosing a direction. Your mind lags behind, asking for reasons, timelines, guarantees. That delay can feel unsettling, even frightening. You want clarity now, not later, but meaning doesn't rush to satisfy impatience. It unfolds, layer by layer, as you move forward. What feels like confusion is often incubation, and growth always asks you to wait before it explains. Think of it like planting a seed. You don't dig it up every morning to check if it's working. You water it, protect it, and trust the process. Understanding works the same way. You act on a feeling long before you can justify it. Weeks later, sometimes years later, it clicks. Oh, that's why. The mind loves hindsight because it feels safe there, but life is lived forward, not backward. And wisdom asks you to walk without full visibility. Here's where most people sabotage themselves. They mistake delayed clarity for a wrong decision, so they retreat, overcorrect, or abandon the path. Not because it's wrong, but because it's unfamiliar. If you've ever changed careers, ended a relationship, or moved cities, you know this feeling. The early phase is messy and unglamorous. Doubt whispers, "You made a mistake." But doubt is just the mind adjusting to a new story. Stay long enough, and coherence emerges. Understanding always arrives after commitment. A powerful practice here is journaling across time. Write what you feel compelled to do today. Don't analyze it. Just record it honestly. Then revisit those pages months later. Patterns jump out that were invisible before. What felt random becomes purposeful. What felt painful becomes precise. This is how trust deepens. Not blind trust, but earned trust. You realize your inner guidance has been consistent all along. The delay wasn't absence, it was maturation. Once you accept the delay, pressure dissolves. You stop demanding immediate answers from life. You allow experiences to teach instead of explain. This shifts how you handle uncertainty. You move with curiosity instead of panic, with patience instead of force. And something subtle happens. You begin to feel smarter without trying. Because intelligence isn't speed, it's timing. As this patience settles in, another layer opens up, one where feeling itself becomes a kind of intelligence. You were probably taught, subtly or directly, to distrust your feelings. Don't be emotional, they said, as if emotion were a flaw. So you learn to suppress, rationalize, or talk yourself out of what you feel. But here's the truth most people never hear. Feeling is a form of intelligence, not chaos, information. Emotions are data streams from a deeper layer of awareness. They don't explain themselves because they don't need permission. They register truth faster than thought ever could. When you ignore them, you don't become rational. You become disconnected. Think of feelings like weather patterns inside you. You wouldn't argue with rain for being wet or wind for being loud. You observe, adapt, and respond. Yet with emotions, you resist, judge, and suppress. That resistance creates confusion, not clarity. A sudden wave of sadness might signal something unfinished. Irritation can point to a boundary being crossed. Joy often marks alignment, not achievement. When you listen instead of react, emotions guide rather than overwhelm. They want cooperation, not control. Here's a practical shift you can make immediately. When a strong emotion appears, don't ask, "How do I get rid of this?" Ask, "What is this trying to show me?" Write the answer without filtering. You'll be surprised how precise it is. For example, anxiety before a meeting might not be fear of failure. It could be your intuition warning you to speak honestly or to walk away from something misaligned. Books like Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman help name these signals. Naming turns noise into navigation. The mistake isn't feeling too much, it's acting too fast. Emotion needs space before decision. If you react instantly, you miss the message. If you suppress it, you lose the signal. The sweet spot is observation. Let the emotion rise, peak, and fall. Notice what remains after the intensity fades. That residue is wisdom. It's calm, clear, and actionable. That's when feeling and reason finally shake hands. As you develop emotional literacy, life simplifies. Decisions feel lighter, even when they're hard. You stop outsourcing your inner compass. You trust yourself more, not because you're certain, but because you're honest. This honesty reshapes relationships, work, and self-respect. You waste less time pretending, and slowly another shift begins to happen. You start acting before you can fully explain why, not impulsively, but intuitively. Which brings us to a different way of moving forward. There's a moment when waiting for clarity becomes the very thing blocking it. You tell yourself you'll act once everything makes sense. But life doesn't work on permission slips. Some doors only open when you put your hand on the handle. Action, in this sense, isn't recklessness. It's participation. You move not because you're sure, but because you're present. The soul understands momentum in ways the mind doesn't. It knows that stillness can turn into stagnation, so it nudges you forward, gently at first, not to explain, just to begin. Think about how you learned to swim. No one explained buoyancy in a way that made you confident. You learned by getting in the water. Clumsy, awkward, a little afraid. Understanding followed experience, not the other way around. Life decisions work the same way. You won't think your way into courage. Courage shows up after movement. That first imperfect step reorganizes your inner world. Suddenly, what felt impossible becomes manageable. Here's a grounded way to apply this without blowing up your life. Act small, but act real. If you feel drawn to writing, don't wait for a full plan. Write 1 page a day. If you sense a career shift, start learning the skill before quitting the job. Read Atomic Habits or Deep Work to anchor motion into structure. Action doesn't demand drama. It demands consistency. Each small move feeds confidence back into your system. The body relaxes when it sees proof of movement, and relaxed systems think more clearly. This is how clarity sneaks up on you. Over-explaining is often disguised fear. You rehearse justifications so you won't be judged. But the need to be understood too early weakens your resolve. Not everyone needs to get it. Some paths only make sense to the person walking them. When you act first, you protect the seed of intention. Explanation can wait until roots form. Otherwise, outside opinions uproot what hasn't stabilized. Silence plus action is a powerful combination. It lets reality speak on your behalf. As you practice moving before explaining, something shifts internally. You stop negotiating with doubt. You don't eliminate fear. You outrun its paralysis. Each action builds a quiet self-trust. You start believing yourself because you see yourself showing up. This doesn't make life easier, but it makes it honest. And honesty simplifies decisions. Soon, you'll notice you're not chasing certainty anymore. You're following something deeper than confidence. You're learning where logic finally meets its edge. Logic is a powerful tool, but it's a terrible ruler. It excels at organizing what's already known. But when you're standing at the edge of change, logic hesitates. It asks for data that doesn't exist yet. So you wait. You analyze, compare, optimize, delay. Not because you're lazy, but because logic can't see forward. It only rearranges the past. That's why life-altering decisions rarely feel logical at first. They feel irrational until they become inevitable. Think of logic like a flashlight. It illuminates a narrow path directly ahead. Useful, yes, but limited. The soul, on the other hand, works like night vision. It doesn't need full light to move. It senses direction, not detail. When you rely only on logic, you miss the terrain outside the beam. You mistake caution for wisdom and hesitation for intelligence. Meanwhile, opportunities pass quietly. Here's where people get trapped. They use logic to justify staying comfortable. They say, it doesn't make sense right now. But comfort always makes sense in the short term. Growth rarely does. If you had waited for logic to approve every risk, you'd never have learned to speak, love, or lead. Those skills emerge through exposure, not explanation. Logic caught up later and claimed credit. That's its favorite trick. A practical way to rebalance logic is to limit its authority. Use it to evaluate execution, not direction. Let logic help you plan how, not decide if. For example, if you feel called to start something, don't ask logic whether it's safe. Ask it how to do it responsibly. This keeps you grounded without being frozen. It turns logic into an ally instead of a gatekeeper. Structure without suppression, discipline without denial. That's where sustainable momentum lives. When logic steps back into its proper role, intuition gets room to breathe. Decisions feel less like battles and more like alignment. You stop arguing with yourself. You act, assess, refine. This creates a rhythm instead of a stalemate. And slowly, control loosens its grip. Not into chaos, but into trust. A trust that doesn't need constant validation. Because something else is learning to guide you now. Something rooted in faith rather than proof. Most people misunderstand trust. They think it's passive, naive, or blind. But real trust is active. It moves things. It's a creative force, not a personality trait. When you trust, you're not ignoring risk. You're choosing to collaborate with uncertainty instead of fighting it. Trust says, I don't see the whole picture, but I'll take the next step. And that single step rearranges reality in subtle ways. Momentum begins the moment resistance softens. That's how possibility sneaks in. Think of trust like stepping onto a bridge in the fog. You can't see the other side, and that's unsettling. But the bridge doesn't appear after certainty. It appears under your weight. Life responds to commitment, not contemplation. Every time you act from trust, feedback shows up. A conversation, an idea, a coincidence that isn't really coincidence. You start noticing how often support was waiting, not before, but during. Trust doesn't remove fear, it gives fear direction. Here's how to practice trust without being reckless. Start by tracking what happens when you follow through. Did the outcome match your expectations? Rarely, but did it move you forward? Almost always. For example, reach out to someone you feel drawn to collaborate with, not with a perfect pitch, just honesty. Or invest time in a skill that keeps calling you back. Courses, books, or mentors tend to appear once you commit. Trust creates a trail others can follow, and trails turn into paths. The opposite of trust isn't intelligence, it's control. Control demands guarantees before movement. Trust accepts learning through experience. When you control everything, you limit growth to what you already know. When you trust, you invite expansion. This doesn't mean abandoning responsibility. It means releasing the illusion that you can predict life. Control tightens your world. Trust widens it. One shrinks possibilities, the other multiplies them. And your nervous system knows the difference immediately. As trust becomes familiar, your creativity sharpens. You stop copying safe paths and start responding uniquely. Decisions feel less heavy, more alive. You notice how often life meets you halfway, not with ease, but with support. This is where courage stops feeling heroic and starts feeling natural. You move because movement feels honest. And honesty generates energy. Soon you'll recognize a pattern you can't ignore anymore, because some signals keep returning until you answer them. Some things in your life don't go away. You distract yourself, stay busy, change environments, yet they return. A thought, a desire, a discomfort you can't quite shake. That's not obsession, it's insistence. The soul doesn't scream at first. It repeats, gently, patiently, almost politely. But repetition is never random. It's a message knocking again because it wasn't answered the first time. Most people mistake this for restlessness or dissatisfaction. In truth, it's direction asking for acknowledgement. Think of these recurring signals like an unread notification. You don't see it, but your phone keeps reminding you. The reminder isn't the problem. The avoidance is. Your soul works the same way. It brings back the same themes through different faces and situations, the same kind of relationship, the same frustration at work, the same longing late at night when things slow down. Life keeps changing the packaging, hoping you'll notice the content. Urgency grows when awareness is delayed. Here's how to work with this instead of fighting it. Notice what keeps asking for your attention, not what's loud, but what's persistent. Write it down without judging or fixing it. Ask yourself, what is this asking me to become? Not what it wants you to do, but who it wants you to be. Often, the action is secondary to the identity shift. For example, the urge to create may really be a call to self-trust. The desire to leave may be a call to honesty. Clarity deepens when you ask better questions. Ignoring these signals doesn't make them disappear. They just go underground and resurface as exhaustion, cynicism, or regret. That's why people feel tired even when life looks fine on paper. Energy drains when you live out of alignment. But when you acknowledge the message, even without acting yet, relief appears. Awareness alone releases pressure. You don't have to leap. You just have to listen. The soul relaxes when it's heard, and from that relaxation, wiser action becomes possible. Urgency softens into direction. Once you start responding to these quiet signals, life feels less chaotic. You understand why certain doors closed, why certain paths felt heavy no matter how right they looked. You stop chasing noise and start following resonance. This doesn't make you reckless, it makes you precise. Your choices gain weight and intention, and gradually, a bigger shift takes place. You're no longer trying to silence the soul or dominate the mind. You're preparing for something more complete than either one alone, because wholeness isn't about choosing sides. Most inner conflict comes from choosing sides. Mind versus soul, logic versus feeling. Control versus trust. You were never meant to pick a winner. The struggle itself is the misunderstanding. Wholeness doesn't come from domination. It comes from cooperation. When one part tries to overpower the other, energy leaks. But when they listen, alignment forms. Integration isn't compromise, it's coherence. Think of the mind as a skilled architect. Think of the soul as the visionary. A vision without structure stays imaginary. Structure without vision becomes empty. When they work together, something real gets built. The mind organizes, protects, and refines. The soul chooses direction, meaning, and timing. This partnership ends inner resistance. You stop feeling pulled in opposite directions. Decisions begin to feel clean instead of exhausting. Here's how integration looks in daily life. You feel something deeply, then let the mind shape the response. You don't suppress emotion, but you don't obey it blindly. You pause, sense, then act with intention. For example, if you feel drawn to change, the soul signals why it matters. The mind figures out how to do it sustainably. This balance creates confidence without arrogance, movement without chaos, and growth without burnout. When integration happens, self-trust stabilizes. You stop second-guessing every decision, not because you're always right, but because you're whole. Even mistakes become instructive instead of shameful. You learn faster because you're not fragmented. Energy that was spent on inner debate gets redirected into creation. Life feels less like resistance and more like response. You don't need external validation as much. Alignment becomes its own reward, and peace stops being a distant goal. This is where wisdom matures, not as an idea, but as a way of moving through the world. You think clearly and feel deeply. You act decisively and reflect honestly. Nothing inside you is fighting for dominance anymore. Instead, everything is listening. From this place, your choices ripple outward with quiet authority. You don't rush, you don't freeze, you respond. And from here, the story naturally wants to be told, because now you're ready to begin at the beginning. Now comes the part most people avoid, applying what they've just understood. Insight without action feels good for a moment, but it changes nothing. So let me ask you this honestly. Where in your life have you been waiting for permission instead of listening to yourself? What decision have you been postponing because it doesn't fully make sense yet? What signal keeps returning, quietly, patiently, asking for your attention? And what would change if, just once, you trusted that first inner knowing and took a small, real step forward? You don't need to overhaul your entire life tonight, but you do need to stop betraying what you already know. Alignment isn't built through dramatic leaps. It's built through daily, conscious cooperation between soul and mind. One honest choice, one brave action, one moment of trust repeated consistently. So here's your challenge. Pay attention this week to what feels alive versus what feels forced. Notice where your energy expands and where it drains. Then act, not perfectly, not fearlessly, but truthfully. That's how transformation stops being an idea and starts becoming your life. If this message resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who's stuck in their head and disconnected from their inner voice. And make sure you subscribe to Mind's Silent Echo and activate notifications, because this channel exists to help you think deeper, feel clearer, and live more aligned, one insight at a time. Your soul already knows. The only question left is whether you're finally ready to listen.